name is Robert Lehmann. I'm Director of String Studies and Orchestral Activities at the Osher School of Music at USM. And this is my little tutorial video for the 2024 All-State Violin Auditions. This year we have to do two things. We have to play some scales and we have to play the Haydn G Major Concerto. The scales for this year are the A-flat major scale and the G melodic minor scale. If you've heard some of my previous videos, you know how importantly I feel about presenting yourself as a performer, even when you're doing your scales. Don't save the performance aspect for the concerto. The judges want to see you perform from the get-go. Naturally, you want your scales to be well prepared, nicely in tune, and solidly played. But that doesn't mean you can't use your best tone. So, for example, when we do the A-flat major scale, you're going to start in first position. When you get to the third bar, you will shift on that D-flat first finger. Then you will continue your way up. When you get to the fifth bar, shift to a first finger on the C, and then again a first finger on the E-flat. That'll take you all the way up to the top. On the way down, however, you're going to do a 4-4. 4 on the top A-flat, 4 on the G. Coming down to the F, the E-flat to the D. Then you're going to shift to a third finger, third position on the C. Keep coming down, second finger, first finger, and then your final shift will be back into first position on the G. These scales need to be played by memory, so you'll want to start practicing these on time so that you have plenty of time to remember your shifts. 1 on the A string, 2 on the E string going up, and then all the shifts are just on the E string coming back down. The rules and regulations require us to play 1 note per bow at a metronome marking between 88 and 92. So it will be something like this. If you've heard some of my previous videos, you know that I talk about the ringtones that are created when we finger a note that has an open string that can vibrate sympathetically, sort of to check your answers, if you will, to make sure that you're in tune when you hit these various points. Unfortunately, in the key of A-flat major, we don't have so many open strings. You know, other than the G, the D is covered because it's a D-flat, the A is covered because it's an A-flat, and the E is covered because it's an E-flat. So you really, really have to be careful that you really are in tune. So I would suggest using a tuner. And as you're practicing, find out what your tendencies are. And if you have a tendency to be flat on a note or sharp on a note or flat on a shift, just mark a little pencil marking, an arrow up or down. And as you practice this, you'll stop making the same mistake over and over again. And that's a great way to figure things out. People often ask me, should I vibrate or not vibrate in my scales? And I always tell them that, of course, scales are meant to make sure that we can hear the pristine intonation that we're looking for. However, I think it's also, since we're performing, it's okay to color the sound just a little bit, warm up the tone with just a little vibrato. Just make sure that you don't go crazy with the vibrato to the point where we can't really hear if the note is in tune or not. Great. So now, moving on to the next scale, which is the G melodic minor scale. This time it's slightly different. We're only going to have 1 shift on the A string and then 1 shift on the E string going up. But like the previous scale, all your shifts on the way down are going to be on the E string. So One thing to remember about the melodic minor scale is that it's different going up than coming down. So on your way up, you really only have to worry about B flats. The rest of the scale is just like G major. But coming down, you now really have to worry about all the naturals, the F naturals and the E flats coming down. So this is what the G melodic minor scale looks like. Here's your first shift. Here's your next shift. First finger onto the C. 4/4. Coming down, whole step. Shift to the D. Shift to the A, third finger. I double the top note just to be able to explain the difference between the 4/4 going up and the 4/3 coming down. But when you play this for real, you just play it as written and you won't double the top note. Luckily for us now, we have our ringtones back at our disposal and we'll be able to check our intonation as we go up and down. Well, that's it for the scales. Really not that hard to memorize and you should be able to do them just fine. Let's move on to the concerto. This year it's Haydn's G major concerto. It's one of my favorite pieces. It's a lot of fun to play. We have two little excerpts we have to prepare from measure 21 through the downbeat of measure 41. And then from measure 53 through 76. So let's just go ahead and talk a little bit about this. The tempo is actually not really that fast. If you measure it in quarter notes, I would say you should be between 60 and 66 to the quarter. If you would like to practice it in eighth notes, obviously just double that. So it's going to be either 120 or 132 to the eighth note. And I think there is some merit to practicing it with the eighth notes just for super security before you decide to go on to the quarter note pulse. Haydn lived during the classical period. He was a little bit older than Mozart. And it was a very elegant time. So if you've seen my video about the Mozart G major concerto, a lot of that same style applies to Haydn. You want to make sure that everything is beautifully tucked in and nothing sticks out, nothing is rough, everything is very elegant. The opening chord should really announce you as the big soloist after the orchestral introduction. So feel free to go ahead and roll that chord. Don't feel like you need to really crunch it. You can take some time to open up this way. And it should never be rough. Just because it says forte and it's a big four-note chord, please don't attack it. Go ahead and roll the chord. Let's go ahead and play a little bit. Now, I hope you've seen that from that first little phrase, I take really seriously the ends of my sentences. And I want to make sure that everything always ends with a bow or a curtsy or some other very genteel gesture. You never want to end with a kick in the pants. So let me do that for you again. Also, I put in a little trill on the third beat of the second bar. You're welcome to do so if you'd like to, or you don't have to. See how elegant that is for your first statement? One little word of caution. Make sure you don't compress the triplets. Sometimes when we have a lot of triplets in a row, it can kind of get out of tempo and kind of rush. and then it just sounds messy. The tempo is really not that fast, and so especially if you've practiced it at the 8th note pulse, you should have plenty of time for everything to speak nice and cleanly. Going on, in bar 25, we have a forte piano as we go on. This again should never be rough. It should be nice and round. So a few things to be on the lookout for in this little section. When we get to the end of bar 28, bar 29, you have a lot of little dots, little staccato dots on the 16th notes. These don't mean that you need to bounce the bow. They just mean that you need to have a nice short, crisp stroke. Especially since there are a lot of bow string crossings that are difficult for the bow, you want to make sure that you're in control and playing on the string for all of these. Once we get to bar 31, we have a change in articulation. Now we have dashes on these notes, tenuto marks. See if you can bring out the bottom of every arpeggio so that we're starting from the second 16th note up. And it also helps to do a little crescendo, even though the bar is marked forte. Maybe start a little bit less, and then you have somewhere to grow as you get to the top of the arpeggio. Please don't rush the 32nd note scale. It's not a very fast tempo, and you don't want it to rush because it sort of robs you of that wonderful arrival at the top. Okay, so just make sure that even though it's a backwards bowing, stay nice and steady. Once you get to the top here, make sure that you sing. Now, I do a slightly different dynamic thing than what's printed in the part. In bar 34, I like to play the first 2 beats loud. And then I do a little bit of an echo after that. So here's 34, the first 2 beats loud. Now soft. Then I get loud again. I like to start my trills on some of these long notes from the upper note. I think it's a little bit more elegant. So rather than going, I like to go. Either way is fine, whatever you prefer. Just make sure that you get those 2 little grace notes, which are called Nachschlags, in right on time. You don't want to play it late. You've got to be right on the downbeat. So I'll play that again with my forte and piano echo. Two and three. 2 and 3. I think all of the fingerings that are in this edition are lovely, and I think if you just follow them, you'll be fine. Moving on to the next little excerpt that starts at 53. Same thing applies as we talked about at the beginning. Make sure you're nice and elegant. Again, I like that little trill. You don't have to put it in there if you don't want to. Just promise me one thing. Promise me you won't kick that last note. Resist the urge, please. Going on. Let's talk about all these little trills and Nachschlags for a second. I think that this is a really cute little section, a little cute passage. And as such, I think you can clip the 16th notes a little bit and keep it really nice and light and use very little bow. And if you'll notice, I'm not letting the trill and the Nachschlag get in the way of good rhythm. Practice it this way first. I have a saying, if the cake doesn't taste good, the frosting won't help. And that's kind of what you need to think about here. You want to make sure that the notes have good style and are nicely in tune, and the notes are nicely clipped. And then it's just a matter of putting the icing on the cake, the decoration. Don't go crazy with the trills. 1 or 2 flips is more than enough. Again, be careful and don't kick that ending. Make sure you elide that ending. Now comes a little bit of a tricky passage in that we have these double stops. Make sure that you get your first finger locked in on both the A and the E strings to hold that 5th. And then angle your bow so that you're playing 80% on the A string, 20% on the E string. If you don't do that, the E string, being naturally brighter, will overwhelm the lower string, and that's where the melody is. So you want to make sure that you balance more towards the A string than to the E string. I do bar 61 forte, and then I do bar 62 as an echo. And then I repeat that thing again. 63 I play loud forte, 64 I play piano as an echo, then crescendoing back to 65. So here's 61. Echo. Now please notice that again, even though these notes have little staccato dots on them, I didn't bounce. I can play short without losing control. You want to hear, you don't want to hear, all right? If you play it nice and clean on the string, it'll sound short and light and much cleaner. Let me play that for you again. This is starting in bar 65. Great. Now for this final passage, I think doing it all at one dynamic is kind of boring. So I like to play around with it a little bit. I play some loud, some soft. I go back and forth. You can experiment, see what works for you. But I think keeping them all at one dynamic level might be a little boring. So I don't think you'll be penalized if you show some ingenuity and opinions about how you feel about these different arpeggios. So I start out loud. Then I play piano, almost like a question. Then I answer it again in the next bar loudly. Back off a little bit. Loud. Soft. Now back to loud. right here. You should be in third position, first finger on the D sharp. I cheat now and I reach up to a second finger, F sharp. So now I'm in fourth position. Here's the echo. Crescendo. Reach up for the E. Stay in fourth position, octave. Okay. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our brief little tour together, and I look forward to hearing how it goes for you, and good luck at your auditions.